Good morning, everybody, and happy National Payroll Week 2025. I hope you're having a fantastic week of celebrations and shining a spotlight on all the important work that you do and the fabulous industry that we work within. I'm Laura Murphy and I'm the content editor here at the CIPP, and we have got an absolute treat for you this morning. Today we'll be exploring solving ever-increasing payroll complexity with our speakers Ian Giles, Global Payroll Director, and Simon Stewart, Director of Managed Operations at Dayforce. Before we kick off, just to let you know, we do want this session to be as interactive as possible. So please do submit any questions you've got at any time using the Q&A function you'll see at the top of the screen. If you do accidentally pop your question into the chat, don't worry, we have the lovely Libby from our events team here who will transfer that across for us so that we address it at the end. And we also have the option within the Q&A to upvote any questions that you're interested in. So if somebody else asks something and you think, I absolutely need to know the answer to that, you can use that function so that we can prioritise those questions. And we will come to them all at the end of today's webinar. So I'm now going to hand over to Ian to kick the session off. Good morning, Ian.
Hi, thank you, Laura, and welcome everybody to Under Pressure, Solving Payroll Complexity. And again, happy National Payroll Week to all of you. I actually can't believe we're halfway through it already. There's only another couple of days to go after today. So if you've been anywhere near a payroll department recently, you'll know exactly what we mean by under pressure. The CIPP Payroll Insights report for 2025 has laid it all bare. These are your responses to this survey. Payroll teams are being stretched more than they ever have before. Some payroll professionals are handling close to 1,000 payslips every single month while still dealing with the never-ending stream of tax code queries, pay-related questions, and ever-tightening cut-off deadlines. We can all attest to the fact that payroll isn't just about making the numbers right. It's about accuracy, it's compliance, employee trust, and business continuity. When pressure builds up, things can crack. But today we want to show you how there are ways to ease that pressure. And over the next hour, we're going to take a practical look at the key challenges raised in the Insights reports itself. And more importantly, share with you how payroll teams can move from firefighting to adding real strategic value. I'm excited for this one. Like I say, it's what you're all thinking and it's what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's a great way to hear about what payroll looks like from other people's points of view, those that are sitting in the hot seat as well. So on behalf of CIPP, the payroll profession, thank you to everybody that has responded to the survey. On a side note, these results can be used for benchmarking and understanding where you need to make changes within your payroll team, your business case to the C-suite if you want. Please feel free to share whatever you see and what you hear within this webinar with other payroll professionals, colleagues and peers. It's important that we raise the profile of payroll as a profession and shout about all of the hard work that we do. In terms of housekeeping, no planned fire alarms, no Wi-Fi interruptions, we hope. I'm going to monitor the questions, as Laura said, throughout the session. So sit back whilst we dive into the report, its findings, and what you can do about it. Before we start, we're going to quickly introduce ourselves. As Laura said, I'm Ian Giles, Global Payroll Director at Dayforce. I work in a very, very small team known as the Global Payroll Centre of Expertise. I've been in the payroll and workforce management industry for the last 25 years or so. I've held various positions during that time, had the opportunity to manage payrolls of 100,000 people per payroll cycle myself in over 170 countries, to start up all the way through to enterprise, in retail and beauty, all the way through to cybersecurity and to aerospace. With me, I have Simon Stewart, who again he leads our managed payroll operations team at Dayforce. He spends his days in the trenches like yourselves. Simon, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. As Ian said, I'm Simon Stewart and Director of Managed Operations here at Dayforce EMEA. I'm responsible for the team servicing our managed services customers in the UK and Republic of Ireland. Similarly, I've been involved in payroll in a variety of roles over the last 35 years, working in-house, bureau and in the outsourced managed services space. My current role means that I'm working with our customer base across many different industries, see a range of business sizes, but also come across the consistency of the challenges that all payroll professionals face in the way that work is today within the industry. I'm delighted that, unlike the early 90s, we now have software to actually assist us in doing what we all want to do best, and that's pay our people accurately and on time.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So what does today look like, and what are we going to cover? We're going to cover the growing workload versus team size gap, how to reduce tax code queries and late data underpayments, why real-time visibility is a game changer for payroll, and how freeing up payroll teams from reactive works can create a real business value. Then we're going to wrap up with some practical takeaways, and then we're going to go through the Q&A section. So off we go. Before we get into the detail, and although it might feel like it's very much the wrong way around, I want to share some of the report takeaways, and I think it's really going to help set the scene. So we're going to do this, and we'll also have some takeaway actions for you at the end. So those people that like things in order, don't worry, it is going to end up at the back end of things as well. Okay, so how many payrollers does it actually take to serve employees, or also the other way around? So the average payroller is currently servicing 825 employees. That's quite a large number. And from an in-house point of view, payroll teams tend to top out at 5 until they actually hit the 5,000 employee mark. This doesn't take into account the complexity of payrolls, as specialized teams may be required to, from a more resourcing point of view. Where can you find most payrollers working today? And again, that's not another joke. And I'm sure there is one there somewhere in the background. Most businesses are, the payroll teams within there are actually working from a hybrid point of view, splitting time between the office and home. I remember when you actually couldn't get, time to go off to a dentist appointment for an hour or so. So things have changed massively since then. There doesn't appear to be any fixed kind of you have to work a certain day of the week within the office or from home. But this is definitely the biggest way that people are actually working at this moment in time. It's far more popular than it's ever been before, and it seems to be working particularly well. 20% of respondents, however, operate more than one arrangement, so it is quite flexible in terms of what people are doing at this moment in time. The next statistic here is quite a bit of a shock. I remember back in my day when I kind of started out, qualifications within payroll weren't really any kind of thing, but businesses now, on average, a third of them are expecting an IIP or a CIPP qualification. And I think that's a statistic that's moving in a fantastic direction compared to what it's been before. Bearing in mind the importance of payroll, it's really, really nice to know that the people who are actually doing it for you are qualified in the work that they are doing. The number one query that we're actually getting at this moment in time for employees is in relation to their tax code, and it's still an issue today. It's not moving and it's not changing in any way, shape or form. They are there and they're causing problems for all of us at this moment in time. Before we get into the, sorry, moving to the wrong one here. Sorry, slide doesn't seem to be moving along for me. So the top 3 queries at this moment in time, I kind of alluded to what the first one is at the moment, and that is tax queries. But number 2 and number 3 code problems we're having at this moment in time, the bane of all of our lives, is underpayments. And a lot of those are actually being caused by late data and missing information. We all know that that is really, really important in terms of how we actually get it and how that is moved along the payroll process, but it is still causing payroll problems at this moment in time. The third payroll query that we're actually facing at this moment in time is access. And that is what employees are telling us. They're actually not getting the right kind of information, or they don't have the visibility to it, which is quite a strange something if you think about it, bearing in mind the number of portals we actually have where employees have the ability to access pay slips, year-end documents, and all of those kind of things. So my train of thinking here is it's more of a communication or a onboarding problem for new employees, maybe an implementation that hasn't landed in the manner that it's wanted to, and that is actually causing the problems that we're actually seeing there at the moment. So let's start with the big elephant that we are having in the room at this moment in time, and that's capacity. Why are payroll teams feeling, this so acutely at this moment in time? I think it's because payroll has never been bigger in scope than it has been before. Regulations are multiplying, compliance demands are higher, and employee expectations are just growing by the day and by the period. And the tech landscape around us is shifting fast. Nothing is constant anymore. But while all of this is taking place and while the world of payroll is growing, most payroll teams haven't. And this mismatch can create cracks in the system, cracks that can easily turn into real risks for businesses. And it's very frustrating for employees as well. Payroll isn't the big magic red button that anybody thinks it is. So the common causes we have here, legislation is more complex than ever, from evolving tax codes to varying different specifications. Think GDPR, IR35, pay transparency for starters. Remote and hybrid workforces are creating moving parts. In some cases, employees are no longer in one jurisdiction. A small payroll team is now needed to monitor and handle very, very large tax regimes, currencies, benefits programs, and those kind of things. Many organizations have added new pay frequencies: weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, lunar, monthly, off-cycle, and expenses are now all running in parallel, and that's causing a huge problem as well. There's a lot to do in a very, very small frame of time now. And more often than not, it sits on the payroll teams that haven't grown to meet that demand. Simon, what else are you seeing in terms of complexity, and what else is changing over time?
So certainly in the recent past, we've had the evolution of pension auto-enrolment since its introduction, the widespread use of salary sacrifice for a range of items, the impact that then has on national minimum wage compliance, and the push to also payroll benefits instead of the traditional P11D. We've also seen a drastic change to the traditional 9 to 5 working. And as more generations enter the workforce, on-demand pay is certainly a key topic, as many workers want to move away from the usual pay frequencies that you've mentioned and access their payments when they want.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've all got our thoughts on the queries and the underpayment side of things. We've all had the phone calls, we've all had the emails, the instant messages on payday, but what is actually causing them, and what can we do to help prevent them? I'm going to start this time with you, Simon. Your team is at the coalface here. What are you seeing? What are customers telling us about what they've previously experienced, or maybe even had to do by way of tasks and duties?
Yep. So certainly automate. Just jump down. Sorry about that. So yeah, fragmented systems that we have when there's a double input. So what we don't want to do is have a situation where somebody thinks that they've done something. So the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's actually taken place. And that's a quote attributed to George Bernard Shaw, and it's still true today. Any update made in one system doesn't always get to where it needs to be in order to fulfill its purpose in paying employees. regardless of whether it's the hiring managers believing that they've passed on everything in plenty of time. So fragmented systems within any business are a great pain point. Having to manually enter data from a variety of sources is also very resource heavy. So it's open to human error. There are risks and omissions, and of course, rekeying into different systems is a further waste of time. And the data disconnect means that at no given time throughout the payroll process can any meaningful data or MI be extracted. So until those data streams align, you really don't know how the payroll is looking and how accurate it's actually going to be.
Okay, thanks. And from your point of view, what do you think, what works instead?
So having access to a single database obviously is a massive boost. So one that spans the employee life cycle from recruitment through HR and into payroll ensures that a single source of truth is just that. Nothing is out of date. It reduces the data loss in transferring key information before it's actually used in the payroll calculation. So the data feeds, whether they are from a time and attendance system when the timesheets are approved, or the automatic download of P6 information from HMRC, means that the core record that you've got is continually updated for an accurate payroll. And more importantly, it removes the touch points and bottlenecks that a traditional flow of information can actually cause. Indeed, utilising employee self-service allows the employees themselves to update certain information because they're the ones that need to provide it to either an HR or hiring manager. All of which leads to the ability to perform real-time validation throughout the month. And that's certainly early enough before cut-off so that any under or overpayments are spotted in time to be able to actually correct them.
Okay, thanks again, Simon. How many of you have had to make a payroll decision based on data that's already out of date? I think everybody, internet hands up. I think, well, there's one, there's two, there's several people all kind of like saying that's definitely something that they live and breathe on a cyclical basis. I think it's absolutely real, and I can tell you now, and you can kind of like see from all of the hands that are actually being raised at this moment in time that you are absolutely not alone. There are payroll leaders out there that say they still wait until after payroll close to identify errors, and by then it's obviously far too late. You're already on the back foot and waiting for that noise to happen on payday. We've all worked in payroll for whatever period of time that we've done that, whether or not that be 500 employees, 10,000 employees, or 100,000 employees. We don't get that amount of thank yous every single payroll cycle, but we do get the information, the information from business leaders. We do get that noise every single time that there is a mistake. And 99.9% of the time, that payroll data is bad or it's invisible when it's supposed to actually be with payroll. So we're here to mop up and make sure all those kind of things are actually taken care of. Things are totally different today, though, and to give you an idea of how far we've actually come, there was that much of a lack of real-time data when I first started out in payroll. It was a weekly payroll, and I spent Monday to Wednesday making sure that everything was done, and that was 500,000 keystrokes every single week, Monday to Wednesday. Thursday to Friday was actually then spent putting all of the reports together, emailing them out to business leaders for nobody to actually react to them. I got to a point in time where I actually stopped sending out the reports and didn't actually get anything back. That's how important or unimportant they were to people at that point in time. But continuing with the story, the calculation on a Wednesday of the payroll took that long that a colleague of mine actually taught himself to juggle. Absolutely bizarre and strange. I don't think if any of us have actually got that amount of time in our payroll week or calendar at this moment in time, but that's how good and how much we have actually moved on. If we use this infographic to explain the traditional payroll model, when asked when payroll is sent, like I say, the response that we get back is when we've run out of time. That's how close to the wire payroll is actually being done at this moment in time. And the reason for that is because traditional payroll operates in batches and very, very much after the fact reporting. You upload the data, you press the button. Yes, that big magic red one that we all know doesn't exist. You hold your breath, you click your heels 3 times, and hope that everything lands in the right place and then balances as it should. That brings challenges with it. There's no visibility in live errors, duplicates, missing timesheets, and much, much more. CFOs, CHROs make financial or workforce decisions based on last month's data at best, not in advance what has happened. And that's not a great place to be in. Compliance breaches are discovered after they've happened, and that puts every business at risk where that does happen. But with continuous calculation and real-time data, payroll doesn't have to be reactive. You're juggling time, you're practicing, that kind of thing has to be done in your own time after working hours. Simon, does this really matter? What do you think, and what are we kind of like seeing from that point?
Yeah, it certainly does. And if you think of it like this, operationally, if you can review the data as that builds up in the system, as the pay period progresses, you can detect and correct, more importantly, the errors before they get anywhere near a payslip. So that's a win. Strategically, being able to provide up-to-date payroll data means that leaders within the businesses can forecast, reallocate their resources, or make headcount decisions with confidence. So that's another one. And the employee experience, so real-time pay accuracy builds trust, it improves retention, and directly influences financial well-being. So it lets employees focus on the job that they are actually hired to do. So that's another one. And compliance, so this is how we proactively identify issues and get them rectified before they become a reality when the payroll is actually committed, and that's a big one.
Okay, thanks. So I talk about payroll maturity all the time. You might have heard me rattle on about it. And what Simon is saying, is how you actually move that needle from immature payroll to strategic payroll. This turns payroll into a proactive decision support function rather than something that is merely transactional. And again, I keep saying it, payroll is not a back office function. It's not just transactional. It's the only function within a business that actually, reaches every single employee, every single payroll cycle. There isn't another part of the business that can actually do that. And payroll without real-time visibility is like driving at night without the headlights. Technically possible, but it's definitely not something that you're going to do. And at some point in time, you are going to hit something. So what about the enablers of real-time decision making? How can we make that happen today? Things like cloud payroll platforms, integrations, AI-driven anomaly detection, moving away from siloed systems. HR, time, and finance should all interact and should all integrate with each other seamlessly, into unified data streams. We need to invest and build and dashboards and alerts, things that can actually tell you what's going on in your payroll rather than what has happened within your payroll. They provide payroll leaders with proactive insights, not just post-payroll reporting, but things you can actually do to make positive change to what is going to happen rather than have to rectify something. With finance, HR, and other the stakeholders in the business, you have to involve them. You cannot win on your own. A closing thought just in this section here: the payroll industry has spent decades perfecting accuracy after the fact. Real-time visibility flips that on its head. It's all about prevention now rather than correction. Sorry, there's somebody just making a comment, and I'm not sure whether or not we're actually being heard or not. Let me just have a quick look in there. I know it was a comment about this being harder in Bureau. Okay, we'll actually kind of like look through the comments in the chat as we kind of get towards the end. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting kind of like conversation there. I definitely want to build on that and come back into that if we can at a point in time. I'd encourage you to evaluate your payroll data. Is it driving decisions today, or is it just reporting yesterday's information? And if that's the case, you absolutely do need to do, like I say, flip that on its head, turn it around. Real data, business insights is where you are going to provide a huge amount of value to your business from your payroll function. you know how many of you have spent time chasing timesheets, fixing address typos that actually are using that payroll data rather than to help shape strategy? I'm guessing all of you at some point in time have done things that you really feel you absolutely shouldn't be doing, should have been correct before they actually reached you. And it's definitely something that has been happening for a very, very, very long time. Most payroll teams could moonlight as detectives or clairvoyants, hunting down managers for late approvals, correcting fat-fingered errors, predicting spreadsheets that never materialize and that kind of thing. But, is that really where we add value? I don't think so. And it's definitely not. So what happens if we can take away the noise of constant queries and errors, prevent manual error fixing, stop late approvals, and quit all of that compliance firefighting that we have to kind of like go through at the moment? If we actually move away from that, and let's also not forget about the people side of things, having to do all of that unnecessarily and in what can actually be an extended period of time, the result of that is burnout. And we're seeing a huge amount of that within the payroll industry at this moment in time, and have done since COVID. We can feel very, very much underappreciated, and miss out opportunities to contribute in other ways. So what we're going to do now is look at how we can actually, add value to what it is you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Okay, Simon, so when payroll is done right, payroll teams can actually focus on that value add. What would you say, where does that value really, really lie?
So yeah, with the automation, instead of having to go and look for the changes and data gaps, we can use the payroll software to assist in flagging these to us. So targeting what we actually need to review, as opposed to wading through spreadsheets to actually find that. So any changes to payroll need to be clearly instructed, whether it's from the hiring manager, HR, or in some cases directly from the employees themselves. So getting the correct information to include in the payroll is critical. So rather than coming into the teams to physically key, it's updated directly into the payroll record, and that's what forms the basis of the calculations. Then we have the ability to audit the data, not just what's there, but also what's not, because by being able to extract data on the criteria of when it was last updated, then allows you to do some more ongoing checks throughout the pay period. And even if that data is not yet static, without having to revisit it again, you can check and move on. So in terms of what's not there, setting the parameters and thresholds allows us to flag the key errors, particularly along the lines of the FPS submission criteria. So missing address data, character length, the inclusion of special characters, anything that's essentially going to prevent data from being accepted by HMRC. So in doing so early in the process, it allows the ability to reach out to HR, the managers, or even the employees themselves to be able to get that corrected before the cut-off.
Okay, thanks very much. I think it goes without saying, payroll is there and we can add a huge amount of value if we are doing things in the right kind of way. If we are proactive, if we are engaging with stakeholders, and to me, I don't personally like the term KPI. To me, KPIs are what I would call watermelon metrics. They look absolutely fantastic on the outside. They're big, bright, and green, but they're red in the core. To me, payroll performance metrics is how we actually also get to add value into payroll. It's not about playing any kind of blame game, because to me, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. But payroll performance metrics, when used effectively and correctly, can actually help other parts of the business, understand where those problems lie. And until you have those conversations, they might not be aware that there is a problem. As an operational manager who doesn't work in payroll, you have things that you need to do to make sure that your team gets paid, but you also have to do things from an operational point of view. And payroll can actually feel to other people like a tick box exercise, something they need to get off their desk, and a deadline isn't, we have to kind of like remind people that a deadline isn't the day they have to do something. It's a deadline that they can work to. If they can get that off their own plate and off their own desk 3, 4, 5, 7 days beforehand, then absolutely great. So, that information flows to us in a more timely manner. If your payroll performance metrics aren't working, they are something that needs to be adjusted. If they don't add value, they don't help tell the payroll story, they are definitely something that needs to be looked at and revisited. So what can you do? What wheels can you put in motion when we hit end call today? We're going to walk you through 5 practical steps and tips to help you take control. And what you'll see here is, well, you're not going to see because this is just this one slide, but we're actually going to walk you through that. So you might want to kind of like take notes. I'm sure there's going to be the recording at point in time. And if absolutely necessary, we can reshare the takeaways with you in a Word document or an email or something like that. But to me, it starts with getting your data house in order. You need to start with structure. If your data is scattered, inconsistent, inaccessible, something that you can't work with, you are flying blind. You're adding to the complexity, and that's not something that we want. We're here to take that away. You can't report accurately. You can't advise confidently or make strategic decisions without a solid data foundation. We work in numbers. It is all about that. There is the people element, obviously, but unless we are actually able to report back what we are doing, it makes no sense to anybody other than a net pay in a bank account at the end of that payroll cycle. Data is absolutely key to what you are doing. So review your payroll system capabilities. Can you extract clean data, comparable pay data across regions and entities? You need to assess data quality and consistency. Are formats standardized? Are definitions aligned? Does everybody understand what they're doing? Invest in integration if you don't have it. Connect payroll with HR, with finance and compliance systems to create that single source of truth. Clean data isn't just a technical issue, it's a strategic enabler. These are the things that are going to help you, like I say, tell your payroll story. Simon, what's the second takeaway?
Yeah, so for me, it's running an internal payroll and process audit. So it's not just a nice to have, it really is an essential. So an audit lets you actually take a step back and objectively helps you understand what's working, what's broken, and more importantly, where those risks lie. So using internal expertise or bringing in third-party specialists, it opens up and often a fresh perspective can uncover hidden inefficiencies. We all get used to doing what we're doing on a daily basis, but we sometimes need somebody else to look at it to question why. The other thing is to document everything. So whether it's bottlenecks or workarounds, you capture the rationale behind what your current practices are, why you're doing them, and where they actually came from. And preparing a remediation plan. So once you've reviewed them, you can assign work streams and prioritise the fixes based on the impact and the risk that they're actually going to have. So you treat your audit as a living, breathing document and revisit it at regular intervals so you don't fall into the hamster wheel trap.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of like goes back to the payroll performance metrics. If something isn't working, change it. I keep saying, this, and I hope and everybody can kind of like agree with me. We've always done it this way, is for the dinosaurs. It's something that you have actually got to get away from. It doesn't work. Just because it was done 10 years ago by two payroll managers previous doesn't mean it's what you do. I sat in London at the Payroll Services Summit yesterday, listening to stories about how we need to tackle change, how we can't just accept the norm, the status quo. If something isn't working, work with the team to actually build on that, and those are the kind of things that we have to do. So point three for me would be building your communication strategy. Communications isn't something that is just necessarily done by a communications team. We need to be able to tell the payroll story, and we need to be able to tell the payroll story well. Payroll is often misunderstood, and by that, I mean that in a lot of ways. People do not get what we do. They're very, very thankful for the fact that net pay means that they can pay the mortgage, they can buy groceries, they can do all of those kind of things, but they don't get what actually goes into it. And that kind of like keeps going back to that big magic red button. People, we talk about, let's take monthly cycle, for example. We don't sit around on our hands for 3 weeks of the month waiting for data to come in. There's a huge amount of work that goes into that. It isn't something that's all done in the last 3 or 4 days worth of the payroll cycle. There's a huge amount of effort that goes into that. We need to make sure people fully understand that we are working all of the time to make sure that something is done and employees are paid. A strong communication strategy is going to help you educate those stakeholders, build trust, and drive change. So you're going to have to be proactive. You're going to have to be consistent and very, very clear. Don't wait for issues to arise. Get ahead of them, get in front of them. And, if you do see something that has gone wrong, communicate quickly. It's a lot easier to kind of like ask for forgiveness than permission to necessarily do something. Going back to one of the points I made earlier, we need to support. We're not here to blame people. We can always say it was finance, it was HR, but we're here to help teams with poor practices improve, rather than point fingers. It's going to get us absolutely nowhere. Tailor your messaging. If we look at those of us with the left brain, the right brain side of things, we all take information in differently. Learn to speak the language of finance, learn to speak the language of HR and compliance to ensure alignment. We need to make sure that we're actually doing that, and it's okay sending out the message, but we need to make sure that it is received and that it is understood, because if it isn't, again, that's something that we need to change and we need to improve on. Visibility is going to breed credibility. Make your wins known, tell your story really, really well. Simon, number 4.
Yeah, so following on from both communication and also the internal processes audit that I mentioned earlier on, is updating those practices. So perform a deeper review. Processes will evolve over time, but often roles and responsibilities don't. So it's time to make sure that we are realigned. We need to revisit who does what, responsibilities clear and documented from the communication you mentioned, Ian. We need to make sure if there's been a shift of data coming from the finance teams or the HR teams that weren't there previously, we need to make sure that they're aware of it and that there's a document which clearly shows that data flow. So updating the internal policies and, very importantly, the SOPs that we all have, we ensure that they actually reflect the current realities and best practices of what we should be doing. It's not a dusty document that we point to on a shelf to say, yep, we've got SOPs. They actually need to be able to do what they're meant to. And also fixing what's broken. If it's a process that's not working, don't patch it. Don't just make it work for that period. We need to actually redesign it so it's going deeper than just the audit of what is and isn't working. Change management is really key. And part of that is bringing people along for the journey, whether that's our payroll teams or the main stakeholders that we've got from within the businesses.
Okay, thanks. I think there's an absolute theme coming away from these takeaways, and I'm going to kind of like do the fifth one in a second. But if something isn't working, don't stick with it. Change it, adapt, overcome, get better. And finally, step 5, tip 5, is to train your people. Your team is your front line defense or your biggest compliance risk. If we are not getting it right, we are potentially there and we are creating, errors for the errors and problems for the business. It might not be something that has originated from payroll, but you stick the word payroll on something and it's owned by payroll. So we have to make sure that as the end of that cycle, for the payroll part of things, before we actually get into payments, then when we actually get into GLs and all of that kind of stuff, we have to make sure that what we are doing is absolutely key. You need to empower your team with the knowledge and tools they need to succeed. Otherwise they are just kind of, it's the sink or swim kind of like situation. If we don't provide them with what they need, they're going to do the job. They're not necessarily going to do it any better. And going back to that payroll strategic model, we have immature, lots of systems, lots of technology, lots of manual processes and that kind of stuff. Then we actually get into the next level of that, where we're reducing the amount of work that we're actually doing manually. We're reducing our tech our tech stack count and those kind of things, and we are getting better. We are actually learning every single time and improving. If we go back to the very, very immature side of things, we are just living, we are just kind of like breathing and getting through the day, and we are not going to get better within the next cycle. Training your people and making sure that they have those tools is absolutely key. So invest in ongoing training. I've worked in lots of businesses where we all have training budgets, and payroll seems to be the function, because of what we're doing, hamster wheel and all of that kind of stuff. We don't get to go to events like National Payroll Week. We actually don't get to do the courses, the training and all of those kind of things. And that budget is absolutely wasted. So please make sure that you're actually using that. There's every potential that you won't get it next year around. Regulations change, systems evolve. Keep your teams up to date. There is so much information on the internet at this moment in time to help you. It's absolutely unreal. Create a culture of accountability. Make compliance and accuracy part of your team's DNA, something that they live and breathe every single day. Encourage cross-functional learning. Payroll doesn't operate in a vacuum. Help your team understand the much bigger picture. And going back to Simon's point about the standard operating procedures, and business contingency, the way that I actually like to think about it is there shouldn't be a payroll contingency, plan. There should be a business contingency plan. Your part of it should actually fit in behind onboarding, HR, and that kind of stuff. And the payroll part of the standard operating procedures should actually fit into finance and everything else that goes on. It is a much bigger living, breathing document than we probably all give it credit for. So make sure that we're doing that. Training can be seen as a cost by a business, but it's not. To me, it's a safeguard. It's all about protecting the business. The more information that we have, the better protected a business is. Simon, any other last kind of like tips from you?
Yeah, so often those of us in payroll slog through 1 month of a very quick breather and then launch into the next pay run. But what we need to do is help break that cycle. So spend time investing in our people, as you've said, redefining our processes, and we really need to move from firefighting into fire prevention. That then allows our teams to be ready to deal with whatever the payroll world throws at us next.
Okay, thanks. So one final thought from here. Payroll may be under pressure, maybe constantly under pressure, but it doesn't have to break. With the right tools, the right processes and visibility, payroll teams can actually go from surviving to thriving. I've been looking at my monitor as we kind of like go through this session, and I've seen I've seen one of the icons at the top that said people and for, and I kind of like thought for a point in time that we were boring the lives out of people and everybody was dropping off. And then I looked to the left hand side and there were some nearly 250 of you still kind of like listening to us. So I'm quite thankful for that. Apologies for the technical problems that we've had. We had some last minute kind of like changes to the presentation deck that we are kind of like showing you today. Some of the animations haven't worked, as you've kind of like seen. I've gone back from one slide to the next and all that kind of stuff, but I'm hoping you've actually kind of like taken something away from the session. I'm now going to hand it back to Laura, who's going to take us through the question section. I think we're going to read through the chats as well to actually kind of like see some of the comments you've got. I'm particularly interested in the bureau side of things. I think that's maybe something Simon can comment a little bit more on, from managing a multiple client kind of like payroll that we do here at Dayforce. But Laura, I'm absolutely going to hand it back to you. Didn't think we'd quite make it to the 45 minutes, but we have. So thankful for that.
Thank you so much, Ian and Simon. That was a really informative webinar, and our guests are echoing that sentiment, which is great news. Apologies, as Ian said, for some of the technical issues with the slides. You will get a copy of those slides after the session, so you can look back at them at your leisure. So we have a couple of comments for you both. So the first one, I think you touched upon, Ian. We've had a couple of comments about how things work in a bureau situation. So there was a comment around it being slightly different in a bureau, as they have to wait for clients to confirm data before they receive it. Is that something that you can pick up and comment on?
Absolutely, and in terms of the flow of data, that's one of the things that we really want to be able to change. We see it the same in the managed services side as well. We're lucky enough that we've got access to the database that the customer is updating, and we can do those on an ongoing basis. The real win for me for bureau, and having worked in bureau payroll before, it's getting across the benefit of being able to send information, not we don't do anything until we can do everything type model. It's moving away from that and showing if you send in information up to the deadline instead of don't send us anything and the deadline's when you throw it over the fence, you then have that horrible peak and trough. So it's, whilst I appreciate that there's not as much control over that when you work in that bureau situation, it's trying to educate people on the benefits of getting away from that and encouraging, send us it, we're able to do things. And if you're able to then see the quicker turnaround on reports, catching errors, you can then tell the story of this is what you actually get from it, rather than, yes, we would like to have it that way just to make our life more easy. You're actually showing the benefits, and we do the same to our customers as well, so that the actual reduction in errors and the increase in management information that you can get tells its own story.
And I think that's reinforcing one of the key takeaways you mentioned earlier of communication and how important that is. So yeah, we've also got a reaction to Ian earlier when you said we've always done it that way, which when you said that, a little shiver did go down my spine. Absolutely loathe that term. We have people agreeing with you that in the wider organisation, payroll unfortunately often gets the reaction of it's not broken, so why do we need to fix it? And that, payroll is involved surprisingly late in decisions, which, given that it's normally a business's biggest expenditure, is quite concerning. So what are your views on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that coming from Brian, who I actually met for lunch last week, funnily enough. He's based in Belgium and is just about to move his operation out to Malaysia. I'm hoping for the invite, Brian. Thanks very much. But yeah, I'm absolutely with you. Unfortunately, we are seeing and have been for a very, very long time as that back office function. If I kind of like, tell another one of those stories from years of old, I first started out in payroll, and I'm going to see the hand starting to rise here when payroll had its own little very, very dark corner of a shared office, or it had its own office with a locked door that people had to knock on to enter. All of the screens faced away from the door in a classroom style environment and all of that kind of stuff. And that's what payroll was. It's not like that anymore. Who'd have thought that 6 years ago payroll could actually be done from anywhere else other than an office? COVID kind of showed us that was the case, and all of those changes to national insurance we had to do on a Thursday night into a Friday morning and all of that kind of stuff. But if you do not give payroll that seat at the table during those very, very onset early conversations, we are going to continue to pick up the pieces, and that's not what payroll should be. As you said,
No.
Laura, in most businesses, it is the biggest cost that we actually have. So it should be given a lot, a much bigger amount of appreciation for what it is we do and who we are and how we actually keep a business going. We are there, as I said, touching every employee, every single payroll cycle, and not every other business does that. If you look at the onboarding parts of a business, guess what? They only actually will deal with them actually when they're candidate moving into an employee, and that's just the way that it kind of is. So that seat at the table is really, really important. And we've probably actually been our worst enemies for a very, very long period of time. And I'll stick my hand up and kind of like say that we get on with the job, and and that's what we do. Let's get involved in those conversations. If we know there is merger and acquisition going on, let's ask people whether or not they thought about what that means from a payroll point of view. If we are doing things, let's get involved in those conversations. Stick your elbows in and get in there.
Yep, and as Brian had mentioned in the comments, people see if it's not broken, why fix it? The problem is payroll is at the end of that cycle, and we have been martyrs at time, heroes in doing things. The classic swan. We look wonderful from the water up, but underneath the feet are going 10 to the dozen. That's part of the cycle that we need to change, because everybody else says, but the system's fine. I send it to you and you pay people. Not enough time to do it properly, not enough time to do it compliantly. And that's where, Heather's mentioned in the chat as well, for years, it was, does payroll sit in finance? Does it sit in HR? Does it sit in finance? We should be our own team. As we've mentioned, the one single biggest cost to most businesses are the employee salaries. So there's a lot to be done, especially when we get held accountable for why have people not been paid? Why are we not compliant? Why? All these things are coming from the end of the business, but they need to feed into that as well. So as I said earlier on, it's taking the stakeholders along on the journey with us, and it's time that we possibly told that story outside of just the payroll community.
I was going to pick up that point with you because that seemed to generate a lot of conversation in the chat, which is great. Where does payroll sit? And I almost feel like that's an older argument, because it used to be, as you say, HR or finance, but we're seeing more and more, no, payroll needs to be a department in its own right, just because of its sheer importance and of how it impacts everyone in the organisation, as Ian said, at every point of their employment. It's not just at one point in time, it's every single payday. So yeah, that generated some really nice conversation in the chat. We've had a few more comments just thanking you both again, and also saying that it's nice to know that the big guys are having the same issues as people dealing with smaller payrolls do. So it's been reassuring to hear that from you guys for some of our attendees this morning. We've also had a couple of other comments just about managers in the wider business not taking ownership of data, and how that then ends up sort of being payroll's problem.
100%.
I'll take that one.
Yep, on you go.
Yeah, it kind of like goes back to the payroll performance metrics again. If you can actually tell the story of what has happened that should actually get people to take accountability for it. It's not about, oh yeah, sales forgot to actually send in the bonuses yet again. We've actually now got to do a supplementary payroll run. You know, it's about providing that information to the business and to the right stakeholders, the influencers that can make things change and make things happen. You know, if somebody is the habitual, character that doesn't get something done, have a conversation, whether or not it's off the books, off the record, or something like that, an informal conversation to say, do you realize that your 10 people in that department are potentially at some point in time going to mean that 990 other people do not get paid? We're not going to wait around for those 10 people every single month without fail. You've done it now for the last 5 months. We need to actually put a change in place to make it more effective and make that done. It's clearly something that there is a problem with. So let's go back to the very, very beginning of what you do to us and what information you provide, and find out where that problem is. It might be that you're waiting, every single cycle for that one employee to actually send their information through or confirm that something has happened. So your 10 people's problem might actually just be one person that's causing that. Let's get to the root of it and fix it. If we have those conversations, we should, not just ideally, we should get better at what we're doing.
Thank you for that feedback, Ian. We've also had a couple of comments here around there not even being dedicated payroll people in the organisation.
Yeah.
Which, again, when we're talking about the biggest expenditure to the business, sort of what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's one of the great things that National Payroll Week does. It actually lets us tell people outside of our offices or outside of the part role that people have, we're here, we actually do a job. If we do it well, and that's the problem, if we do it well, nobody knows. People are able to do their own job. We just make sure that happens. But events like this and utilising situations where we can actually let people know that there is an industry there, and it's trying to sort of fight the good fight and letting people know that it is a proper industry, in the same way that CIPD and the various finance bodies are as well. So that's part of what we need to get across. And the work that the CIPB does is wonderful in getting that across.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Ian. I think that's all we've got time for this morning. But thank you, everybody, for joining and for being so interactive in the comments. We do actually have a special National Payroll Week offer for you. So we're really excited about this. If you use the code NPWMEM when joining as a new member, you will get 20% off your first year of membership, plus the £50 administration fee waived. This offer applies only to new memberships for the first year only, and renewals will be at the standard price. Now, this offer is exclusive and isn't available online. So to claim, you need to email our membership team at membership@cipp.org.uk. Additionally, if you have any further questions about membership levels, benefits, or any other general inquiries, it's the same contact email address. So that's membership@cipp.org.uk. If you haven't yet registered for the additional webinars this week, we're only halfway through the week. We do have a lot more content in store for you. Please do visit the CIPP's website to sign up. Enjoy the celebrations and don't forget to tag us in on social media. Happy National Payroll Week, everybody, and thank you once again to Ian and Simon.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed it.